Hello, welcome to another episode of Wall Street Bets podcast, where we discuss decentralized finance and democratizing DeFi to make it more accessible to everyone. I'm Venus DeMille, and today we'll be joined by Fran Strajnar, the CEO of Techemy Capital, as well as a strategic advisor and investor to the Wall Street Bets team, to talk about the latest developments in the blockchain landscape, the new WSB ETP, and the Bitcoin ETF that has all the markets talking. As a quick recap of the week, Bitcoin reached an all-time high since March. The Bitcoin ETF launches and the market likes it. And The Weeknd joins Tom Brady's NFT platform Autograph as it expands into music. For more about those updates, go to our WSBDAPP YouTube channel. And now to introduce Fran. So Fran is the chairman of the Techemy group of companies. Techemy is similar to a private equity group or venture builder. They buy, invest into blockchain infrastructure companies. And he's also the founder of Brave New Coin, Blockchain Labs, which is a digital asset exchange. Welcome, Fran.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I like to think of you as sort of a hero with 1,000 faces in terms of not only your legacy in this space, but being really, really, adept and accomplished in so many different areas of blockchain and crypto. I'd love if you could give the audience a little bit of background about yourself and about your work in this space over the course of time since 2010.
No, it sounds impressive, but you really just need to sacrifice your personal and private life. So yeah, I got introduced to Bitcoin by a buddy of mine in 2010, and I started mining on my laptop, and for all intents and purposes, I thought, there wasn't much you could do with it back then, right? So I didn't pick up and reread the white paper until January 2013, and then I realized that this is a fourth superclass of assets, and money is now programmable and digital, right? And that was extremely interesting because, we all know that the Federal Reserve is about as federal as Federal Express, and something's got to budge, some new technology or some catalyst needs to usher in a new era. So we developed a thesis to invest into what we consider infrastructure. So the first business that we established was bravenewcoin.com, which a lot of people here may or may not be familiar with. Hopefully more are, but it's the TLDR is it's like CoinMarketCap or CoinGecko, but focused on the enterprise space, right? So our clients and partners includes Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg, NASDAQ's global index distribution system that's used by 85% of the world's central banks. You can ask Amazon Alexa what's the price of WSB or any coin that comes from us. Then, I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by some exceptional people, and I created other businesses like Digital Asset Exchange, Blockchain Labs, which has done a lot of bespoke architecture, design, consulting work for a lot of well-known projects. You can check out their GitHub repo. We set up Techemy Capital in 2016 to a lot of people knocking on our door, wanting to have their transactions structured. So we've done all kinds of interesting transactions, from tokens to equity, equity to tokens, token-based employee share schemes. We helped raise over $500 million between 19 clients in 2017. Bancor, Link, all kinds of interesting tokens that seem to have done all right, some of them. We created a stablecoin business called Mint, which we just listed on DFX, which is just tokenizing the New Zealand dollar. So yeah, lots of infrastructure-focused things.
Yeah.
And WSB is obviously one of the businesses that we invested into and helped guide in terms of the product roadmap and strategy there.
What attracted you to WSB?
I've known Vix for a long time. And when Jamie Rogozinski came on board, I felt this was the right kind of cradle to create a DeFi native Robinhood.
Yeah.
Right? That capture that zeitgeist, that frustration that everybody has in their subconscious that there's something very, very wrong with the capital markets.
Yeah.
And WSB as a brand has access to that societal kind of unease, and I kind of view it as like, Occupy Wall Street was V1, Wall Street Bets was V2, and WSBDAPP is the blockchain powered V3.
Yeah, I love that. So to go back in time for a minute, but before you read that white paper for Bitcoin, did you already have a deep bone suspicion about the banking system? Did you
Oh
have
yeah,
you
yeah.
that distrust was already there? So this was sort of like the match that lit the fire for you.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've been digging into these subjects for at least a decade prior to, like, my background's a bit unorthodox because my family had to run away from a war when I was a kid in Yugoslavia, and had a sort of construct of sovereignty questioned at a young age, and then
Wow.
that sort of opened the door into exploring, well, how's the world constructed, and then did an entrepreneurship, master's in entrepreneurship, and got to learn all about the Federal Reserve and the Western Central Bank system. And I was shocked that governments just buy bonds, and this is entirely based on debt. I actually still can't believe that the world runs purely on debt, and nobody seems to realize it. And
Yeah.
money, literally is debt. So that just got me interested in technology. So one thing that catalyzed it for me was I used to work on a magazine. I used to be in publishing before getting into crypto. And that was a magazine called Unlimited that talked about exponential technology trends. I also
Mm.
worked on PC World, Computer World, and those types of technology titles. So, back when everything was first going into the cloud kind of thing. And so I could see that technology can solve problems. And that's exactly what I thought about. Well, this technology can solve monetary problems.
Right. So you went into it. I mean, most people who go into the financial markets to study or entrepreneurship, they're going into it thinking about how to make more of this money that we're talking about being kind of a false idol, so to speak, right? You went into it and saw something that was actually disruptive and revolutionary and could change the face of how we think about money. And then you figured out how to become an entrepreneur within that new framework.
Yeah, I mean, money's great, but it's not what drives me. The reason I want extreme, untold riches is so that I can use my capital to affect positive change in the world.
Right.
You know, um, if you can't do anything to change your environment for the better, then what's the point? You just sit on a beach for the rest of your life, and that's kind of like not really interesting.
Right. And do you find also, I mean, you're in New Zealand. I'm in the US right now. It's been my observation in the US that there is a profound lack of financial education within the context of, I would say, again, 99% of the population. It's not taught very well in schools. It's not discussed at dinner tables. It's just not part of the culture to understand the greater banking system, to understand the government's relationship to that.
Almost like it's for a reason.
Yeah, yeah. And is that, in your travels and in your experience, looking at different countries, different banking systems, different cultures, does this feel like a global issue for you, that just this
Oh
distinct
yeah.
lack of financial education around how banking systems work?
Yeah, look, it's by design. You need to go to higher education to understand that what money is, what value is,
Mhm.
how liquidity works, how the system operates, right? And
Mhm.
then by that point, you're kind of indoctrinated, and your life goal is to make as much money as possible. That's the current paradigm.
Yeah.
Um, there's a bit of a great awakening happening here, right? Like, people have been brought to the precipice
Yeah.
globally. The system's clearly not working, from Europe to the total implosion that's currently started Evergrande in China, and the property market there. The 2018 kind of crash, and the subsequent constant all-time highs with assets being greatly inflated.
Yeah.
And that's just a function of central banks printing endless money, and piling into a variety of assets, propping up asset prices. And again, everything's based on debt. So yeah, the education part is, I think people are learning pretty damn quickly right now due to inflation, and that's global. And I think that we're currently experiencing the beginning of the most radical transformation globally that anybody has ever seen. Nobody alive has seen anything like this. So that education is about to be force injected into everybody, whether they like it or not, because the world around them is rapidly changing.
Yeah, and I think the events of the last 2 years have highlighted certain things, amplified other things, suppressed other aspects. There has been, I think everyone's sort of been asking, well, how is this going to transform and change us in the long run? And I think when you start to look at it through the lens of blockchain, of crypto, and all the things that we're talking about, you start to see it starts to take a shape, and you start to see where that movement is happening and where that evolution is happening outside of just the day-to-day framework of people's lives. And I was reading this morning about Turkey and about, the sort of the Turkish lira crashing, and there being obviously like a lot of unrest and confusion there. But Turkey also has a reasonable amount of crypto adoption as a country, as a population. What are your thoughts on what happens next, or where that country and population goes?
Sorry, the National Jibbo Championships are happening right outside my door, so excuse the noise. It's economic warfare, right? It's currency wars. And I mean, I just read an article this morning stating that Russia has just published their latest reserve treasury holdings, and they're up to over 23% of their entire national foreign reserves are in physical gold, right?
Yeah.
23% of the entire national treasury, which is 10 years ago would have been unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
So these things are happening because the world's changing and restructuring and reorganizing, and I'm not terribly sure about Turkey itself, but it's interesting. It's like, what has Turkey recently done on their industry front and the military front? Is there some correlation between certain agreements that they've signed up to or not signed up to that's caused their dollar to disintegrate? Same with Latin America. Once the people, don't have the confidence in their own currency, then Bitcoin's just plan B. It's like, well, let's just use this other thing. It's easy. It's simple. I get to be my own bank. Like, forget these clowns and central banks on their last legs. They've run out of ammunition. We'll just fork over to plan B. Done.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of.
Yeah. So I consider you, and we've had some really phenomenal guests on this show, yourself included, with regards to people who were really OGs in I'll say Bitcoin because it was the first thing, and I think that was probably obviously the world you lived in the beginning of this. I have great envy to have not discovered it in the same year, the same vintage that you did. But what's fascinating is the historical thinking that's come out of that sort of class of Bitcoiners or blockchainers or crypto people, where it was much more deeply rooted in philosophy and world building and world changing, and was less about FOMOing into these markets and playing a casino game, which we're seeing more and more of today. So my first question is, how do you observe the current landscape from your vantage point of someone who has been in this market for as long as you have, where it was once rooted in something that I think was much more mythical at the time and revolutionary, perhaps? And the second part of this question is going to lead us to the historical thinking around the Wall Street Bets ETP, and the philosophy and the legacy of understanding that went into creating this product and what makes it so unique.
Yeah, I mean, those are really dense questions, right?
Yeah.
I could probably do an entire talk on just the first one, but I'll try and surmise it. So I like to think of them as epochs, right? Mm-hmm. Epochs of time. Yeah. So in the first epoch of 2010 to 2013, you had a great deal of libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, and all kinds of crazies, right? Bitcoin's like a light to insane moths. They just like gravitate towards shiny new speculative things, right? And then you had like the kind of early investors and VCs, people that had a financial engineering background, investment mentality, so on and so forth, and they could see the potential of this, right? So those two epochs that kind of ended around 2016 resulted in a lot of accidental millionaires, right?
Yeah.
People were in it for the tech, like myself, like this can change the world, this is a plan B, so on and so forth. I don't have a clue that Bitcoin was going to hit, $20,000 in 2017. That was just crazy to think about that when the price was 10 cents, 50 cents, etc. when I first got into it, right? So no, I don't have tens of thousands of Bitcoin, but I have really enjoyed seeing that evolution. And then when we get to about 2016, Bitcoin, sorry about that, Bitcoin is crossing the chasm, right? If you think of the conventional sort of Gartner hype cycle chart, before we get the mainstream, you need to cross the chasm. So the 2018-19 bear market kind of represented that, where Bitcoin kind of proved its initial interest. It fails to completely crash and die. I often laugh at the Bitcoin obituaries, and then out of the lab and into the wild came this thing that we were talking about in 2017, which is now called DeFi, right? The ability to do something with this money, with this value, this programmable value. And you can see that's now disturbing money markets. It's disturbing all kinds of sectors, right? Financial markets first, and then other markets thereon afterwards. So where are we now? I think is at the cusp of mass adoption, right? Especially with the psychological going live of the ETF. That's really kind of putting that seed in the minds of all types of participants globally. So, the next step is to see government buying Bitcoin on their balance sheet, on their reserves. And El Salvador has already started that trend, and I think Panama's next, and then it'll just spread like wildfire. And it'll be catalyzed by a currency crisis that's all but inevitable at this point around the world.
Right.
So I hope that answers your first question.
It does.
Second one was about how does this all contextualize to WSB?
Yeah. I want to know. I mean, there's obviously been some epic development that has happened around creating this ETP product. There's obviously a lot of thought that's gone into it. It's not the most obvious, off the cuff kind of thing. It's deeper than that. It's more complex than that. So I think part of it is how does an investor look at this? But I first want to hear from you as someone who is so involved in the vision for it and the execution of it. What was the thinking behind it and why?
Well, to the governance team, the directors of WSB, I kind of advised them that they should be looking to build sustainable financial instruments that really match the zeitgeist of the WSB phenomena, the movement, right? So that needed to then be matched with reality, with technological reality. So I've been dreaming of decentralized ETFs for years, and we explored things like PIDAO and token sets and index co-op and all of these ETP-like products, but they just failed to not be a huge gaping risk to retail investors in the way that they're constructed. A lot of them also get captured under the legal definition of managed investment schemes, which I won't bore the crowd with today. So, I brought in the Balancer Labs partnership, and Balancer is the only technology that's able to scale at this time to create decentralized ETF-like products. So then we looked at, what assets are actually available on Balancer, which are liquid enough. And thankfully, we had an idea for a global currency, and the assets were available and liquid to begin with that. I think the WSB team wanted a Stonks 20 and a Crypto 20 to begin with, but they're simply not liquid enough. It's not physically possible. There's that reliance on third-party technology in the industry to bring to market and make liquid all of these assets, right?
Yeah.
All that ETPs are just a bundle of different coins, bundled together into one coin. And so that it's kind of like a passive index fund. You could just go and buy one asset and represent 8% of this, 4% of that, so on and so forth. So for the macro hedge ETP, that was inspired with the legacy markets version, which is the International Monetary Fund's special drawing right, which is a basket, a global basket of euros, yen, USD, so on and so forth, so that central banks can settle between each other. Now, for that as a powerful financial instrument, let's bring that and make it available to everyday citizens. But in a practical way, how would somebody use this? Is well, when you invest into something, when you trade, when you then want to go back into dollars, right? At the end of the bull market, during the bull market, whatever. Why go into Tether? Why go into USDC? Why go into any one stable coin when then you need to look at inflation? Am I losing purchasing power sitting on this thing? This dirty fiat.
Right.
So what we wanted to do is offer something that you could park, tremendous amounts of capital and wealth into that can scale to billions and trillions of dollars eventually, that you don't need to worry about if your purchasing power is going to decrease. So that's why, from a practical perspective and this is just the best possible time to launch such a product, because the whole world needs a macro stable asset that you can hold and you have the keys to. That's why we started with that one. The next available ETP is a more speculative one, which is a DeFi ETP. So that you could essentially buy one token that gives you exposure to the top 8 DeFi assets. And I think the nearest competitor has like 400 million assets under management in their products.
Wow.
It's a start.
That would be a start.
Yeah. So, there's a clear trajectory here to start with something stable, build something speculative, and then we can move towards, maybe an NFT ETP, maybe a privacy coin ETP, maybe there's so many theses. All that it takes is for pools to be liquid enough on whatever balancer-like platform on whatever chain over time.
Yeah. It's listening to you say this actually makes so many things clear for me, and also inspires the thought that we appear, I think, as a collective humanity, to be moving more into an awareness about the concept of exposure. I was just marketed something called Masterworks, which is a new, it's essentially an ETF for art that's saying you can get exposure to the art market without owning the art, which, for anyone that doesn't have the money to collect or maybe the interest or the knowledge of how to do it, you can actually just invest in this fund that represents these masterworks of historic art and receive exposure to that, whether it's, $10 or $25,000, because it's understood to be a market that obviously appreciates year over year. But with something, I think when we get into something that's I think more confusing for a lot of retail investors and a lot of people who are new to this, to say, well, I don't want to have to pick the top, what I believe are the top 20 coins that are going to perform the best, because that takes research. And even looking at, whether it's the macro hedge or the basket that comes after this, the process of figuring out where to buy that token and the fees associated with acquiring that token, if you're going to buy everything individually, it can be quite daunting and quite a high barrier to entry, right? I mean, would you say that's fair to say?
We're trying to make that super simple, right? I mean, the interface that they've built in WSBDAPP.com is familiar to anyone that's used PancakeSwap, Uniswap, SushiSwap, whatever, right? It's an instant convert facility, but it's actually a primary market in a definition of the capital markets, right? So when you put in 100 USDC or whatever, it actually goes and buys 2% of this, 8% of that, whatever is in the ETP. And then it holds that and it keeps it in ratio. If it's supposed to be 10% at all times, it'll keep it at 10% at all times. So the next step is to obviously get those ETPs listed on other exchanges. Yeah. And that would be the secondary market. So we're hoping, eventually people start to realize that USD-based stable coins are not as efficient, shall we say, as a diversified basket. So that, it becomes the de facto go-to stable coin of choice for the macro hedge ETP. And so to achieve that, it's about partnerships and integrations to make this available as collateral on Wi-Fi or Curve or other places. Listed on exchanges. I mean, there's a whole pipeline of integrations and work that's going on behind the scenes. I see some comments, how will WSB market their product other than word of mouth? Well, integrations and, a crap load of discussions that are ongoing right now. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think but also brings me to another one, which is the macro hedge on centralized exchanges. So when you say that this could essentially, replace the stable coin, which again is tethered to something that is losing value year after year, whereas the idea of this is that you're going to get sort of anchored and limited but meaningful exposure to an upside by Bitcoin and Ethereum being part of that. So are you seeing this as something that could potentially be used as a token pairing in the same way that, you go on to, let's say, Binance or Bitcoin?
That is difficult, right? Because I think it's a timing consideration. I think if you were presented as a trader with a market on an exchange and it's just macro versus Bitcoin, macro versus Litecoin, so on and so forth, it'll be difficult psychologically to price it, right?
Yeah.
It's currently easier for USDT. It's more that you do your USD BTC trading, and then when you finish, you move your USD into the macro hedge, where you can just park it safely, self-custody it. I think it'll be like that for a while, and then as liquidity begets liquidity, right? It's like a black hole. Once the sort of upward cycle kicks in, then we may find some interesting pairings and people starting to denominate products and services in the macro ETP. And the macro ETP will diversify further itself over time as well, right? And once it's liquid enough, we'll have the Singapore dollar and the New Zealand dollar added to there.
I see another interesting question coming in here for you. Let me put this up, which is, do you see DPI as a competitor product, an index of top DeFi protocol tokens with a couple Billy locked?
Yeah, I know all too much about this product. I'm not the biggest fan, but I'll reserve my deeper thoughts on the subject. What I will say is that the product that WSB has built has ensured that it is wholly collateralized, right? So that there's no fuddy-duddy sticking your own token into the DPI product or whatever the case is. Right? It must be wholly collateralized. If it's 8% ETH, 10% of it has to actually contain that. It has to be auditable and easy to use. It has to be self-custodial. It has to be instantly redeemable. And it has to be, those are the three key pillars, essentially.
Yeah.
So, they're a competitor, but I think, I don't like the solution design. Once you dig under, with the skirt, bonnet, whatever, you start to understand this is not avoiding qualitative risk to retail investors. So yes, it's a good target to go after, right?
Yeah.
I just think that what WSB has built is by the solution design is Balancer has perfected the concept to actually represent the exposure. Now, of course, we want to take the WSB DeFi ETP and offer a staking pool so that you could stake that and earn a WSB yield, and tie that in somehow to get preferential rates and a higher yield if you also have a certain WSB NFT in that same wallet, and you can unlock a more better yielding product. So that's how these things are going to come together as a hint.
That sounds amazing. And again, I want to just reiterate an awareness of how much thought and time has gone into the development of this.
I do want to comment on one additional thing, just because of the DPI thing, right? So the DPI is an index, right? So the WSB DeFi ETP is actually cloning and mirroring an index. It's called the BNC Blue Chip DeFi Index. And currently it actually powers a perpetual swap, so that you can go 10, 20, 50x long on the DeFi index, right, as a perp. Now, what we want to do is create the ability for people to buy the spot, buy the ETP, and then short the perp to get a perfect hedge. And so that way you get a lot more control, and you get some really interesting triangular arbitrage between the ETP, the DeFi ETP on WSB's website, the ETP listed on an exchange against the dollar, and then if that exchange has a spot exchange also has a perp, then it kind of completes the circle, and it makes it really, really useful and interesting for market makers and different types of market participants. So that's the kind of vision, is to have the ETP listed against the dollar with a perp available with what I refer to as exposure parity, right?
Yeah.
So that the ETP has 8% AVE, the index in perp has 8% AVE, so on and so forth.
Thank you for that.
Financial engineering, but it's going to be epic.
Yeah, that's what we're here for, is I think the insight, the education. And I think Matthew Baghetta could not have asked for a better answer or response to his question. The man just got very lucky with that, with that detailed reply. Now, when we go back to the sort of, what's happening in the greater, I don't want to say like in the market, I want to say in the evolution of the crypto space, again, from the vantage point of someone who's been in it for a long time, and this product just launches. Meanwhile, the markets are abuzz with the news about the Bitcoin ETF. Can you just explain for our audience, for our listeners, why that's significant, why it's happening right now, and did the market respond in the way that you expected it to?
The ETF?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's kind of hilarious that the first ETF we get is launched just underneath all-time high resistance. It's like, thanks, regulators, doing a great job protecting retail investors. This is
right.
Like the worst possible timing from a practicality perspective, best possible timing for us crypto holders. I can laugh in their faces about what a wonderful regulatory job you're doing. Look, it's a futures-based ETF. I think the important part is the psychological impact globally. That this is now verified and legitimized in a formal way, right? But the world wants to see a proper ETF that's based on actual Bitcoin settlements.
Right.
I'm hoping I can talk about that in a couple of weeks, because I've been working on that for about 3 years now. So
wow.
That'll be available across a multitude of stock exchanges and brokers globally, with some pretty epic partners that are household names. So I think it's the beginning. I think we're going to see ETFs and ETNs for multiple different coins, and I think we're going to see composite products. So without sort of saying too much, it's entirely possible to create a ETF for one of our ETPs, for example, right?
Okay.
An ETF that just does nothing but buy the ETP. In fact, we have several conversations at this time that I'm helping sort of open doors to the WSB team to explore just such options, because then it doesn't matter if retail people use it within one community, if it's available for brokers all over the world.
Right. So there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that too. I mean, I think the thing that I also want to touch on is, because again, with our community, I think, with this being a new product, there's been this sort of question of how does the ETP enhance the whole ecosystem, first and foremost, for WSB token holders. How does that affect them? I think what we've had today is a reveal and understanding of the level of plans and ambition around where this could go, where it could suddenly, you're not exiting into stables, you're exiting into the macro hedge. It can have a role on CEXs. It can potentially, it could technically become an ETF. Can you speak a little bit to, again, and this is specific to our community, about how the success of the macro hedge ETP, or any ETPs for that matter, that we continue to launch, will benefit directly the token holders of WSB?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's been published on a couple of Medium posts, but all roads lead to WSB tokens. So whenever there's any form of on-chain transaction fees, they just automatically flow towards buying and burning or adding liquidity and locking it into WSB related pairs. So every time somebody swaps the DeFi ETP, the macro hedge ETP, the single asset stonks, or even I'm not sure if it's announced yet, the shiny new, no, it hasn't.
Ooh, can we get an
exciting
announcement?
No. I just remember Jamie's announcing it at Money 2020.
Okay. Well, Jamie's infamous now for slipping up with this stuff in terms of the early.
So I won't do the same. But so whether they're on-chain products like an ETP or not on-chain products, but mega partnership deals like what is about to be announced on the 25th, all of that value flows back to buy and burn WSB or lock liquidity. And then, of course, WSB tokens can vote on a range of different things over time that'll increase. Right now, there's a new vote, I think, loaded today, which is, do we want to go ahead with the DeFi ETP? So if that's a yes, then it'll be launched on the 4th or the 5th of November. And then we got ourselves a DeFi ETP that's similar to Index Co-op, arguably better constructed, and then they can go and flow into, various different integrations, pools, partnerships, wallets, listings, so on and so forth on its own. All roads lead back to WSB. It's just taken a long time to build world first products that require multiple third-party technology partners to do their part and come up to scale and get it liquid enough. So I think that by the end of quarter 4, we're gonna, it's going to be explicitly clear what the value of WSB token is.
Right. And did you understand when you first came into this project as an advisor and investor, did you understand the potential for this to be a vehicle for first to market products like this? Was that potential obvious?
Yeah, I mean, the IP for ETPs is ours, and we didn't want to commercialize it because we thought WSB is a much better brand. Yeah. And so when we talked to Vix and the team and Jamie and all the rest, it just made far more sense to have WSB commercialize it. Yeah. And I think it's the best placed home for it.
Amazing. I'm going to throw another.
It's just designed to be like super simple things, like again, one click and you get all of DeFi exposure. One click, you get all of NFT exposure. If we have an NFT one later.
I'm gonna throw another question up here for you. Do you see the ETP being purchased only by retail investors or funds also?
No, both. So it's convenient for anybody, including retail, to log in and buy however much they want of, say, the speculative one, the DeFi one. Mm-hmm. But there's no reason funds wouldn't either. In fact, it's more convenient for funds. There's a whole world out there of fixed income and passive income and passive index products available for iShares, BlackRock, Vanguard, all sorts. And that's basically what we're doing using blockchain technology. Is you get your sectoral thematic kind of exposure, and the great thing about funds, whatever type they are, is it's self-custodial. Like you have all of the assets in your control, and there's no vaporware. It's when you put $1 million, $10 million into these ETPs, it actually buys $10 million worth of each thing in the correct composition, and it's all liquid and redeemable. I like to say, name one hedge fund on the planet where you can get instant redemptions, right? That doesn't exist. Yeah. So that's technology.
Not only are there none, but I would also argue that name one that the average person can even get into.
Yeah, it's that barrier to entry. Like it costs a lot of money to get exposure to quants, portfolio managers, professional teams to build and administrate and look after products like this. So what WSB has done is kind of democratize that whole process, which I love.
Yeah, I love it too, and I also love my initial sort of bumbling entry into the crypto market was the same as everyone's, which was Coinbase. And I think I might have actually signed up for 4 or 5 different centralized exchanges such as that in the first couple of weeks, only to be like, this is no better than a bank. I mean, it's like your money's frozen here, there are fees here. It's just
Coinbase should have the ETPs.
Yeah.
One click, and then you get DeFi exposure. I mean, they would love products like that. It's just a regulatory consideration. That's all there is.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to kind of understand more and more about that over time too, in terms of how it applies to products coming out of a platform like this. But I do love that it's available to anyone who wants to buy it. But you can kind of go through the DeFi platform, or you can go through eventually a centralized exchange. Because that just at that point it seems kind of like a no-brainer that this would hold appeal, especially to people that don't necessarily love a ton of risk, right? And that don't love to deal with a ton of transactions.
I mean, one side of WSB is like BlackRock with the ETPs, and the other side is like Robinhood with the single asset program, and that'll expand greatly. You'll see over the course of the next few weeks.
Yeah, amazing. So there's a lot coming in the next few weeks in terms of news and developments.
Well, I'm just trying to stoke the fire, but yeah, there's multiple streams coming to fruition finally, and I think everyone's going to have a Merry Christmas.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's really good to hear. Speaking, by the way, of Coinbase, and speaking of Robinhood, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but because I'd love to know your insights. Sure. Coinbase just recently announced its NFT marketplace that's going to be launching. Robinhood announced crypto wallets launching. I think I'm on a wait list for both of those things. I've been dying to get my crypto out of Robinhood since I first bought it. What do you when we're looking at things, these very massive platforms with an enormous amount of users that haven't maybe perhaps dipped their toes into the MetaMask world yet, that might not even be using OpenSea or using some of the platforms we're talking about in DeFi. What do you think those two things signal for market adoption, and how does that impact this cycle or make it different from previous cycles in your mind?
Yeah. So it's like 5 questions packed in there, right?
Yeah, I know, it's my talent. It's my secret. Don't worry, I'll bring you back to them. We can start with the first one, which is, what does this mean for adoption when you see big companies like this signaling?
Well, firstly, where are we in the cycle, right? So we've crossed the chasm. We're at the beginning of that mass adoption phase. And why are these businesses like Coinbase and Robinhood offering these types of products? Well, it's about stickiness, right? They want to keep people on their platform. They want to have them more engaged, create more transactions, create a defensible market, so on and so forth. So I'm not surprised that, Coinbase wants to do lending and wallets and this, that, and the other. They're also slowly becoming a bank, right? So eventually, what's the point of banks? Banks are going to be value-add service providers. That's it, right? They'll, like 30 years from now, banks will just be giant Bitcoin miners validating transactions and offering services on top of that. You want your transactions to clear faster on the Bitcoin settlement network? You can pay a higher fee as a value add, to our bank/mining organization. So I think there's a lot of convergence occurring, but there's also this trend of progressive decentralization, where businesses are cannibalizing themselves before they become irrelevant. So why is Robinhood starting to offer crypto? So they can stay relevant, right? It's a great business, but they need to open themselves up to the new world. And they've just done an IPO, so of course they wanted to wait until after that to entertain, new products like this, so they don't spook their IPO investors, etc.
Right.
So we can talk about these companies differently, but generally, it's they're all forced to adopt blockchain. That's where the point we're at now. They don't have a choice anymore, right?
Yeah.
If they don't offer these products, users, the demand is there because the world's on fire. The central banks are out of ammunition, right? The users are going to go somewhere else. Yeah. And they're already hemorrhaging customers as it is due to DeFi, because you don't need to go to Coinbase, right? If you already have crypto, that's the only reason they exist, is that initial on-ramp. But if you already have crypto, you don't need any of these businesses. There's a plethora of different DeFi products, including WSB, where you can just self-service and get the exposure that you want, or the solutions that you want, right?
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And so this market cycle, to come back to this, has, there have been some narratives that have been quite, pervasive. The NFT narrative being a big one. Solana being a big one, and DAOs becoming, I think, increasingly, so it's something that's front of mind for people. The one thing that I've had a lot of interesting conversations with people about that doesn't feel like it's quite connected yet, or maybe it's just that the platforms don't exist yet, but that feels like perhaps the next frontier of DeFi and blockchain is decentralized social media.
Oh, yeah. I
Is that
wish.
something you can speak to in terms of like how do you even interpret that as a concept? Like, what do you imagine the value of that would be?
Well, the value. Okay, so right now, you are the product on
Yeah,
platforms like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, so on and so forth. You are the product.
yeah,
Every time you create content that is distributed, and your eyeballs and are are sold as attention to the highest bidder, right? But then on top of that, your data is sold as well, and that is beyond questionable. It's now into sort of wartime territory, where just last week there was 3 major articles talking about these algorithms, these weapons of war being deployed against entire bases of citizenry. Like the
yeah,
censorship, I think we all realize how bad it is.
yeah,
Actually, I don't think people realize just how bad things are in big tech. Um, they've been co-opted, they're coordinating with each other, they're changing the perceptions of entire countries at will. I would love nothing more than decentralized social networks, right? Because these criminals, and that's what they are, they need to go, right? All of them,
yeah,
from the boards down to certain middle management at companies like Facebook, they need to go. So, what is the ideal solution? About 4 years ago, I wrote a long blog post about a platform that didn't make it. It's called Steam It, and how they could be the next Facebook. And you just turn that model around, right? You financially incentivize content creators to enjoy a share of all revenue that is derived from the platform. So if you put a, dank meme or a killer blog or whatever, and it gets a lot of attention, a lot of traffic, and that can be automatically, programmatically calculated that, well, we got $200 million in advertising revenue this month. You were 1% of that, right? You were
right,
1% of the eyeballs that were served. So you get 1% of the revenue, or maybe, a smaller percent, and some goes towards the DAO for that
right.
platform. So I expect to see, Twitter-like, Facebook-like, LinkedIn-like platforms come to market that are run by a DAO, and they're tokenized, and all content is all revenue is shared with content creators, just completely flipping that model upside down. It's just taking a while. We need projects like Solana and other fast blockchains, to exist, and for the tools, the kind of module, I call it Lego money, right? So
Yeah,
you've got your DAO module, and you've got your tokenomics module, and you've got your discussion, voting modules, and we're seeing those come to market. Obviously, WSB is using Snapshot for voting, Discourse for the discussion, and then probably one of the major DAO modules to tie it all up when there's enough utility to actually install the DAO properly. So yeah, I couldn't be more passionate about this front, having come from publishing originally, and
yeah,
having seen those little notes go around to journalists and presenters saying, "Don't talk about this subject, or talk about that subject in this particular way," or it's systemic, this problem, and I'm really excited about blockchain-based social networks.
yeah. Do you have any interest as an entrepreneur of moving into that space, or is that part of any of your
Well,
future plans?
I'm pretty busy, as you know, but
A little
and
bit, yeah,
I'm also aware of some extremely well-financed companies that are doing these things,
yeah,
and there's no getting into them from a VC perspective. These are well locked down, very very quiet, and they're just going to come out and be like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" Um, it might take a little bit more time, like next year, but we're going to see some alternative platforms launching over the course of the next couple of months. I'm already seeing BitChute, Rumble, all these types of platforms explode,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, but it's not until next year, I think, we're going to start to see the first of the blockchain-powered ones.
Yeah, this is exciting. I'm so excited about this. I'm noticing now. It's funny when I went onto Telegram. Originally, very few people in my contact book or my address book were on there, and I felt a bit weird being on there. Like, is there something like taboo or stigmatized about this app? And all of my relationships were strictly crypto. And in the last 2 months, I would say 75% of my Rolodex has turned up on Telegram, where you know,
remember when Facebook took themselves down for 6 hours and everybody freaked out?
Yeah.
Yeah, Telegram got 75 million new users.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Yeah, I just thought it's interesting to see people that might not even be in these markets yet or into blockchain yet starting to value privacy and that way and end-to-end encryption and all of these things that seemed really unnecessary 5 or 6 years ago. And I see people like rage quitting Facebook, rage quitting Instagram on a fairly regular basis.
Now. It's so
Yeah.
obvious, right? Like I deleted my Facebook after 6 months of using it, and that was 12 years ago.
Wow.
And I can tell you, like, even back then, it was like a big monkey off my shoulder, because it just feels like you're competing with your friends and family. It's like, that's not what I want from a social network. I want to share memories and, communicate and all the rest. But it's just, the vampirism, attention vampirism.
Yeah. Yeah. And even now on Instagram, I can just be on a scroll and suddenly there's an ad that pops up for a subject that I was talking about at dinner last night, which is, to me, that's been ultimately the freakiest thing when you realize
your camera, your phone, your microphone, your camera, just consider them to be on all the time, right?
Yeah.
You have no control over your operational security with these devices these days.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying and just it's so disillusioning and so for me, I feel a really keen interest in seeing what happens with decentralized social media. As I feel like people are really, really fed up with realizing they've woken up in a world where like, they're owned. We're just totally owned by these companies. And
every ultra high network that I talk to, every single, whether they're wealthy from crypto or before crypto, they're all saying the same thing: just build alternative systems, participate in alternative systems. I had somebody say something incredibly, totalitarian, frankly, the other day, and they'll never hear from me again. I'll stop spending money with them. It's like there's 50,000 other service providers where I can get the service that are not, punishing society because of their weird ideology. It's like, just be a good person. So we get to vote with our capital, whether it's individuals and retail or investors. We just get to say, you know what, I'm going to spend money there instead of over there. It's that simple.
Yeah. I think that's smart. And I think, again, it's something that is great to echo. It's great to echo because there's a lot of noise in this cycle. I think there's a lot of chaos and distraction and fun and, and devastate. I mean, all of the things that can happen, but this feels like a very, very loud cycle. And I think there are a lot of people that are new to it that are, maybe somewhat disconnected from the original tenets of what it's all about, which is really the biggest turn on about all of it at the same time. So I think continuing to recycle the philosophies that go into this, then the whys and the hows, and to sort of anchor these new developments to a greater understanding of the world and how it's working and what's broken and what's not and what we can build is really, really
it's
valuable.
rubbing off on people, isn't it?
Yeah.
This thing is actually a good idea. And, I think of that, this is fine, mem. People are waking up with everything's burning around them and they're going, actually, this is not fine. And so that education is being forced on people just because crypto is now presented as this super easy, obvious thing that people should start using because everything else is breaking more and more every week.
Yeah.
So it's a different cycle this time. It's absolutely a different cycle. It's 100 times bigger than 2017. And I don't think it's just going to be like this blip. I think it's a catalyst of the world transitioning. Think of the time we're in. So I expect the bull market to last until at least the end of Q1 next year. But there'll come a point and it's like, why do you want dollars, right? What can you do with this
Yeah.
stuff? It just keeps losing value. So it's
Yeah.
going to be a wild, interesting time.
I'm going to leave you with one question, which is that, I think there's still a lot of people are speculating in this space. A lot of people are coming in, saying, I've got $5,000. Let me see if I can turn it into 25 grand. And, crypto takes a toll on people in the first few months they're involved, just the 24/7 nature of it, just the nonstop aspect of it. And what I'm starting to see more and more as time goes by are more professional opportunities opening up within this space where it's, this no longer has to be a thing where you sort of, moonlight as this, 2 hour a day kind of, casino, but actually you can start to transition your career, your profession, your interest into this because there are more and more bona fide career opportunities coming up. Do you see that?
Absolutely, but not just in the conventional sense. It's a lot of self-service as well. Like if you're, a quant-based forex trader, which is quite niche, right? Just quit your job, start trading crypto. Period. You'll make more money. Right? The tools are there. You can start with very small capital and just arb and yield and arb and just you'll if you're good at something in the legacy world, you will find that there are projects that are liquid already doing it with blockchain. Right. So jump in, the waters are warm. If you're retail and you're just trying to get into this space, the number one bit of advice is, for the love of God, don't touch leverage. Right? You don't need 100x. You're not going to get rich. You will be liquidated. So just pick a few projects that you're personally excited about. Get involved in their communities. Check them out. Look at the fundamentals, and don't ape into just one thing.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I think it's smart. It's encouraging. I'm realizing more and more people are so inspired by what's happening that they want to figure out how to be a bigger part of it, not rely entirely on their investment portfolio, but possibly, leave where they are and start something new. Fran, it's been such a pleasure having you on. Thank you. Thank you for all of your great work on this project, but also just, everything you're building in this space and your contributions to the larger landscape of crypto and DeFi.
It's been fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. We'll have you back soon. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.